All right, everybody, it is go time. Excellent to see you all here. Once again, thank you all very, very much for attending. My name's Jennifer Wells. I work with Pink Elephant. Been talking about process and service management and specifically problem management for just about 25 years now. And still we struggle in some organizations with putting an effective problem management process in place. As we are going along, please don't hesitate to put a question in the Q&A or chat sections that you will find within Ring Central. And I already have a question from Amanda, who is way ahead of me. Will I share a copy of this presentation? Absolutely. Upon completion, my magician in the back room, Amy, is going to send everybody that attends a copy of the presentation. Okay. All righty, excellent. Thank you very much for that. All right, so let's continue on. And Amy, as a magician, if you would not mind keeping an eye on the chat and taking yourself off audio to get me to look in that direction. So Suzanne is saying, can I speak a little louder? I will definitely give it my best. Hopefully that's a little bit better for you, Suzanne, and we can get going. All righty, so I imagine all of you are here because you are involved in service management and specifically are looking at problem management and maybe even having a little bit of difficulty with that process. One of the things that I'm really excited about is that Pink Elephant has created a course recently known as the excuse me, IT Service Management Essentials course. And this is a simplified look at service management and putting in place core processes to understand better how to implement and what to always watch out for. So within this course, we actually cover 10 core processes, including continual improvement. So our focus today is really on service management in a simplified view and what exactly is it that we need to look at from a problem management perspective. One of the things that you will notice if you've ever taken a course with Pink Elephant before is I have stolen some of the stock type images that we showcase in all of our courses, just to help you understand a little bit about what to expect in a service management essentials course. Basically, the course runs for 3 days. As always, we're always gathering your feedback, and I'd love your feedback about this webinar as well. Yes, there is an exam. The exam for this course is an hour long, 40 questions, 65% pass is required. The big difference between this essentials course and the others that you may have seen, the ITIL Foundations, for example, is that it's all about participation and working together. This is about your challenges and the things that you need. Okay, so I'm getting some information that my audio is a little bit choppy, and I have someone working in the background to get things a little bit better for me. So hopefully that will iron itself out in just a moment. So basically what I really wanted to get across to you about this particular course is the discussions that we have in this course is about getting it right, actually right sizing what it is that we're focused on, specifically in processes that make a difference for you as an organization. Alrighty, so what you get, a presentation that is highly interactive. There is, of course, a syllabus. There is a sample exam and supplemental material that you will actually utilize to make your life a lot better. Is that a little bit better? I'm looking at the chat to see if my audio is any better. Yes, much better, better, better. Oh, so much better. See, I only did that to get, praise.
Excellent. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. So we will continue with this system in place. All righty. Okay, so continuing on, the course, as I mentioned, is 3 days in length, and it is divided into very specific modules for discussion. The first module is around service management. The second is around operational service management processes. There's 5 in total. Then we talk about how to integrate processes, followed by 5 tactical, specifically IT processes as well. And we wrap everything up with continual improvement and measurement, how to actually get the most out of your service management focus. So let's get into service management. Before you can have deep dive discussions regarding problem management or any process, actually, you really need to focus on an understanding of what service management is and why the heck you're doing this to yourself. So one of the hardest things to look at from my perspective as a consultant working for many years with organizations is that there are so many sources that different organizations utilize and go to when they speak about service management. Really, each of these frameworks, best practices, and even standards has their own slight modification on the definition of service management. And it's a common question for organizations to actually ask me, which one should I follow? Well, for those of you that have worked with me in the past and in the present, my answer is always take the best and most usable pieces from as many sources as you need to. You can utilize more than one framework for working with service management. And in most cases, I would actually suggest that you should look at multiple sources. You really need to get familiar with what other frameworks are saying. Don't only look at ITIL 4 or ITIL 3. Don't only look at COBIT or SIAM. Have a broad understanding of what all of these frameworks are looking at. And the bottom right-hand side is the most important point on this slide. The real definition for your organization of service management has to be based on what you intend to use that definition of service management for. Are you introducing it to a new audience? Is it the first time you've looked at it? Or is this something that is ingrained in your culture? Your definition of service management will change and should change over time. It is the ultimate scoping exercise to define what service management actually means to you. Right. So, in order to simplify our definition of service management, I looked at all of those sources and I looked at some common threads. The majority of these service management definitions and IT service management definitions have common threads. Most of them speak about this concept of a provider and a consumer. They speak about products and services, and they all mention value somewhere within them. So I took that to mean these are the 3 most common and important aspects of service management across all frameworks. So no matter which framework or frameworks you're utilizing, having an understanding of these 3 core components is going to be vital to your success. Next thing is that we have to have a starting point. These frameworks can be massive. You can choose to start with a wide scope, which would be something around value co-creation and having strategic, tactical, and operational levels of focus set in your organizational hierarchy. But most organizations actually do start working with service management on a smaller scale, and that's perfectly acceptable. I consider this a narrower and shallower scope, but it's really about this concept of services and processes and trying to make sure that one or both of them are aimed at value. Many organizations don't start their service management journey with defining services. They start by defining things like incidents, problems, and changes. And what exactly does it mean in our organization to get good at these things? And that's perfectly understandable. But remember, if you decide to start with a narrower scope, your definition of service management really needs to try to encompass that. So the question you need to answer for your starting point for service management is really, what can you handle? What do you have the ability to measure? How long before you see something better, something approaching realistic or a realism in your definition of service management? Who's your sponsor? What are they looking for? Wow, look at how big this is. So IT service management as a system has a potentially massive scope. And this is the first time that we actually see the 10 core processes that are going to be covered in our IT Service Management Essentials course. The tactical IT processes towards 3/4 of the way down the page on the left, and the operational 5 IT processes on the right. So really, these are considered core processes. It is up to you organizationally how big IT service management actually is in your organization, but you have to have a timeline around it and an ultimate value or benefit realization statement right off the hop. As I mentioned earlier, many organizations start with incident, problem, and change, and then they follow by request, and we start to get into catalog and config and service level. What is your roadmap that builds out where service management actually exists? Starting smaller is not necessarily a bad thing. In the very middle, in between these processes, we see IT service management principles. You can go to ITIL, some ISO standards to get these. For example, COBIT has some principles in it as well. These are things that you utilize as guardrails in order to help you move forward in your journey. Always remember that service management doesn't have to be supremely massive. You can have a finite actual focus. What are you going to actually focus on from a scoping perspective? So let's look at the definition of IT service management from an essentials view. This is based on a consumer-provider relationship. It always focuses on value to both the consumer and the provider, and how we do this is by providing products and services. What we want to actually do is define service management in the simplest terms possible, pulling from applicable frameworks and using it to apply the scope that we're going to have for service management. Your definition of service management should be slightly larger than your intended starting state. So once again, if you're starting with 3 processes, your service management definition of value is really going to be geared towards those 3 processes plus the next on your roadmap. That enables you to put some improvement in place. Let's talk about a few more definitions before we get into the meat of problem management. First off, value. Value is always defined by our consumer side, and this is focused on quality, performance, and financial expectations of a product and or service, and process, if process is where your starting point is. Remember that financial expectations or cost, as it is often described in multiple frameworks, encompasses the cost of how much effort does it take for your consumer to work with you. I know that there are certain retailers that I choose not to do business with because it's just so painful doing business with them. I can't get in and out. I have to spend way too much time there. So I really choose to do business elsewhere. That's a cost to me. My time is that cost. So quality, performance, and costing expectations specific to products, services, and or processes. We've already talked about service consumers and service providers, understanding that service providers actually are delivering products and services so that they can be utilized by their consumers. Ignoring what happens when a consumer uses a product or service is never going to be considered best or even good practice. If the consumer can't utilize the product or service, they're not actually going to see any value in it. So utilization of the products and services, very, very important. A service is simply an exchange of what the service provider provides and what the consumer gets from using what has been provided. So it's always about utilization from a consumer perspective. These definitions, including the definition of IT service management, really important to actually setting the scope and understanding of all processes in your organization and for service management in general. No matter where you're starting in your journey, you always need to have these definitions down and understood. I believe this is one of my last definitions for you, and then I will start jumping into problem management. What is a process? A process is made up of related activities. And these related activities are actually trying to execute against an output that is not a surprise. Once again, those of you that have spoken to me over the years always know that I am very, very focused on elimination of surprise as much as possible in a given organization. Surprise is never good practice. The basic core elements of every process are defined inputs, defined high-level activities that are executed in the process, and then defined outputs. Always keep these things at the same level. So if you're working on high-level activities, your inputs and outputs are the main inputs and outputs that are triggering or coming out of the process. Keep these things at the same level. If you're going into additional detail about procedures within a process, then your inputs and outputs must also go to that deeper level as well. Above all, make sure that you keep it as simple as possible so that this is easy for you to talk about and explain, but above all, to apply. I'm just doing a little bit of a pause there to make sure everything is okay. I just got a water bottle delivered to me. Isn't that fabulous? Thank you, Donna. Donna's absolutely wonderful. Okay, so let's talk about a per process basis. We have 9 specific core components that we must think about in order to design and implement and maintain and sustain a process. These 9 are listed here. Each process that you put in place means that you must make a decision around each of these 9 areas. Don't go absolutely crazy with these 9 and sort of bury yourself in super detailed terminology and fight over specific terms. The first thing you need to decide is that you're going to be making decisions. The degree of formality is applicable to your organizational culture. So how much documentation and its usage needs to be part of this decision-making process? Think about each area, each of these 9 areas, and make a decision. The key is around wrapping a timeline around this. So I am going to put a purpose and objective statement around problem management, and I am going to leave it alone for 6 months, at which time I will review it. Is it being consistently met? Can we actually have more of a stretch goal, stretch objectives for our process? That is perfectly acceptable. I usually don't go less in time than 6 months. Once a process has reached a certain level of maturity where it is much more consistently performed, I will actually start to lengthen that time and look at my goals and objectives and all 9 of these areas formally every year. And by the way, that is specifically the role of the owner of a process. These are the 9 areas that they actually have to key into. The flow of the course that I've been mentioning, IT Service Management Essentials, is actually going to follow all 9 of these areas. Once again, the 5 operational processes are listed at the bottom of this slide. Today, we are only going to be looking at problem management. So let's jump to that one, problem management. Each module within our course and each process has its own learning objectives. Those learning objectives should be used by you as sort of a checklist of all of the items that you really want to make sure that you've considered and that you've put in place. Remember, during a course environment, there's going to be a ton of discussion within each process area. Unfortunately, today I only have an hour, and we're just going to be outlining some key areas that you need to focus on when we are thinking in the context of those 9 components. Sorry, my headset's sliding around a little bit on my head. Hopefully you don't hear that. All right, problem management. Biggest problem with problem management that I run into? Yeah, I'm not kidding. Nobody knows what a problem is. And I know this is so boring for you guys, but you have to get this down. What is your specific definition of a problem? And you will return to this time and time again. You can keep this as simple as possible for as long as possible. This is your definition. Any of your frameworks give you a definition as a starting point. The idea is to make it understandable in your organization. Within problem management, this is usually the first thing that we tackle right after we name a process owner. And we do name a process owner first so that we have a single point of contact, a role that is ultimately accountable and is able to make decisions around all of these terms, the scope, and the purpose and policies around all of our processes. Remember, problem management in and of itself has 2 basic sides to it. We've got reactive problem management, which is much more popular and well understood. Usually this is a starting point for problem management where we are doing trend analysis off of incidents that have occurred in our environment. We are looking at multiple incidents. So your definition of a problem may actually have specific information within it regarding how many incidents have occurred with similar symptoms over what period of time. So if I have 3 incidents around this particular system that have occurred within the past 3 weeks, I am allowed or encouraged to create a problem ticket and trigger the problem management process. Excuse me, trigger. That's another input. So as we go through all of our processes and our definitions, we are going back and forth with determining scope and determining all of our definitions. If you don't have a process owner in place, however, you don't have anyone that's allowed to have the final say. So always naming your process owner first is key. The second thing you must focus on within your process area of problem management is really what is your definition of a problem. Here, the most simplistic definition of a problem as a great starting point for you and your organizations, something that is an unknown cause or a set of causal factors of one or more incidents. So we are focusing on the concept of reactive problem management first, and we may expand this definition of a problem to actually enable more of a proactive focus in the future. And this would be something that would cause probably a lot of discussion in our Service Management Essentials course. Our next area is to focus on the intent of your problem management process. Intent of a process is covered in 3 major areas: its purpose, its objectives, and its policies. So the purpose of problem management is to find, remove, or mitigate the cause of what has actually resulted in a service disruption. Again, notice that this is a reactive problem management focus. When my organization is able to focus more on proactive problem management, I will have to alter this purpose statement. I work with a lot of people who are fantastic at understanding the concept of a process. But one of the areas that we all struggle with is this idea that a process goal should be the same forever. And that is actually not true. Organizations are going through changes all the time, and our processes are going to have to be aligned and realigned to our organizations. Even the process goals will evolve and mature over time. But the overall intent of the process is made up of not only its purpose, but also its objectives. So here, to expand on the purpose statement that we have, we want our key objectives to be analyzing incident data and provisioning user-enabling workarounds. And that means that problem management exists to assist other processes, namely incident management. So really, in our purpose and objective statements, we're making it as clear as possible that we need problem management to be integrated tightly with incident management, which means there's a dependency here. When you put key objectives in place, especially for a process like problem management, try to make sure that you are thinking in terms of how will you measure that this objective is actually being realized. Same thing with your purpose. Can you prove that you are meeting your process purpose? Do you have the skill sets and knowledge in place that you need amongst the staff that are going to actually participate in this process to be able to prove that you're meeting its objectives? If you don't, it's a training opportunity. The next piece of your process intent is always going to be around your policy areas. Policy areas are sort of like buckets or categories that you would work out policies within. I find it very difficult to look at a blank sheet of paper and come up with 5 or 6 policies, just sort of a splatter diagram. I like to think in terms of buckets, and I get those buckets really from my key objectives and my purpose statement. What do I need to be good at, and what do I need to ensure in order for my process purpose and my key objectives to actually be able to be achieved? So I need the right skill sets. And those are my subject matter experts. I need subject matter experts not only in how to execute the activities of problem management, but I need experts in the technologies and the services and the products that we provide. Who are these people that are going to be required to participate in the process? One of the key activities within problem management is always around root cause analysis as a method. So I need skill sets around root cause analysis. There are several root cause analysis methods and techniques. We need to choose a few of those root cause analysis techniques that are going to be our go-tos within our organization, and we're going to train people on them and have coaches and experts internally to help us get better with them. I always recommend teaching 3 different types of root cause analysis techniques that can be utilized, and using real case scenarios, using previous problems where a certain technique would have been very helpful. Sometimes one technique is better than another depending on the type of problem you are conducting root cause analysis on. Permanent fixes, what exactly does that mean in your organization? So policy statements really help us to understand what is a true permanent fix. A permanent fix should be something that we have removed from our environment for a specific period of time when we're looking for specific symptoms. So a permanent fix can only be seen to be in existence if X amount of time has passed. It might be 3 days, it might be 3 months. It depends on the system or service that you're actually trying to address. The last piece about policies is really around known errors. There is confusion at a lot of organizations as to the distinction between a problem and a known error. Known errors has to be defined, just like we had to define what a problem is. Parameters around when the status change occurs from problem to known error is important. This is sometimes influenced, well, this is always influenced in all reality, by the integrations behind the scenes of problem management. So we often think of problem management as we declare we have a problem, we do root cause analysis, we think we found the cause, we shove in a permanent fix through change management, and now we're done. So where did it become a known error? I was recently speaking with an organization actually where they open a problem ticket, and once they have figured out a workaround, they document it in the problem ticket and close the problem ticket. And if they want to do further investigation, they open a known error ticket. This is a distinction that this organization made. They want to separate the skill sets of working with problems versus working with known errors. When you define what a known error is, you have to have some sort of reason or value behind why would you actually declare a status difference between a problem and a known error. The most common service management language around this actually speaks to the mindset that your problem managers or problem coordinators, the people working the problem, are actually within. If you are trying to figure out why something has happened, if the major focus of your brain is around discovering why, you are dealing with a problem. If your focus is not around the why, but around how do I remove this, then you're looking at a known error. Workarounds are part of both sides of those mindsets. We may come across workarounds when dealing with problems or with dealing with known errors. But ultimately, problem management, from our purpose and objective statements, exists to assist incident management. So both problem and known error states, or separate tickets, depending on your organization, need to be usable by incident management in order to affect workarounds that have been found. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. So, getting into putting problem management in place. Identifying the steps that problem management goes through is one piece of designing your process, but it shouldn't be the first thing that you do after you have figured out your process's intent. So we name a process owner, and then we start working on your process intent. So what is your purpose? What are your objectives? And what are your policy areas? The next piece in pulling together a really awesome, rock-solid problem management process is to focus on inputs and outputs and not the activities themselves. It's too early for that. Don't start with your process management activities, even if you already have your process intent well understood. I always like to start with the outputs first. Problem and known error records are the major outputs. We need a link to change management. We need an understanding of how do knowledge articles play in the problem management role. And then, of course, workarounds. Workarounds are tied to incident management. We need to figure out who knowledge is intended for. It might also be incident management. It may be multiple areas. but really you're trying to determine what you actually need to get out of the process. So these outputs need to tightly align with your purpose and objectives. In order to achieve your purpose and objectives, you want to actually understand what outputs am I expecting to be able to measure that come out of this process, the main outputs. Next, after I've defined my outputs, I focus on the inputs. Quality of things like incident and configuration records. Am I tying problem management to event tools, monitoring event correlation tools? And then, of course, suppliers and other processes such as release and deployment can also be providing inputs to problem management. It's not enough to just think of a list of inputs. You also have to sprinkle in some reality. What do you actually have access to? Do you have configuration records? Do you have configuration items defined? How broad and deep is your configuration management database? What level of relationship do we have with suppliers as well as with release and deployment? What you have access to is going to be what you need to pull into your process. If you find that you have an input that is mandatory for problem management, such as incident records, yet the quality of those incident records is subpar, you may have found your first improvement that needs to be put in place that problem management will help with defining the right level of quality and the right level of information within incident records to enable problem management to be triggered. So once again, I always start with my outputs first and then walk backwards into my inputs. It's a two-step process for input realization, a nice to have and a need to have list peppered with reality. What do I have access to? Do I need to improve things before I actually move forward? Now that we have our inputs and our outputs determined, we can start to look at our high-level activities. When you are going through these activities, and we start in the top left-hand side with identification and end in the bottom right-hand side with closure, we will be leaning heavily on our process intent pieces, which, if you remember, is our purpose, our objectives, as well as our policy areas, and making sure that we have adequate inputs listed to enable all of these activities to be executed. The activities within every process are somewhat tool dependent, especially when you get to a procedural layer. But there are questions that need to be answered along the life cycle of every single process. Please keep in mind that these activities are representing a very high level of process activity. There are loops, feedback loops, as well as directional changes for every process, and those need to be defined at a procedural level. Ideal situations are what are typically represented within a high-level process diagram. It feels very linear. So if the sky is blue with nice big fluffy clouds and there's a gentle breeze, this is what problem management would look like. We'll identify a problem, we'll move into classification of it, which is really categorization and prioritization together. We're going to do root cause, we're going to find a workaround, we're going to create a known error, find a solution. Change is going to love our request for change. It'll be implemented, and of course, we will close. Everybody will be happy. We'll hold hands and sing. However, it doesn't always go like that procedurally. We're going to actually in root cause analysis activity, determine that we were wrong. This isn't actually a problem. It's a bunch of disparate situations that has all been dealt with at the incident level, which has a low level of priority. So we're going to abandon this, or we're going to choose not to move further. You will see those types of loops and those types of decisions not at this high level, but at your next level deeper. I'm just going to double check here for a chat. Oh, yes, Mitch. Mitch's colleague calls this, what I'm talking about, the happy path. Absolutely. This is the happy path. I love this path. It's so beautiful. In theory, this should work. But in reality, we have to put in a lot more loops. And that's where I think some of these service management frameworks have gotten kind of a bad rap. When we look at the happy path, thanks Mitch for that, or this high level path, it is not intended to show that everything should go this way every single time. Deeper levels, such as the procedural levels, is where we see some of that back and forth. So some of the things that your high-level happy path should give you is the ability to ask questions. I know several organizations that I've worked with, we have whiteboarded this happy path, left to right along a whiteboard with lots of white space in between the happy path pieces. And we have written questions that we needed to answer for every single activity so that we got down to the deeper levels, the deeper procedures. We had those questions at the ready, and it helped to drive discussion. Taking a digital snapshot, enabling sharing of that information was the way that we chose to actually work. How your culture is in your organization, how people collaborate is important. I like to start with the high-level happy path because it drives those discussions, and we can move through the high-level activities and collect a lot of questions that are going to occur. For example, identification. That is the first activity. It sounds super simple, but how solid is your definition of a problem? Are there any rules governing what constitutes a problem and what doesn't? Old definitions of problem tried to actually encompass every situation. I think it was something like a single significant incident or more. And that just encompassed everything. The intent was great, but a single significant incident is about tying problem management to major incident management. That's the single significant incident. So what are the rules governing that? And this identification step should help us to identify a lot of those questions that we're going to need to answer regarding all of the high-level steps within problem management. Okay, so I have a question, and it says, how to define the gating criteria between the incident management and the problem management and documents. Okay, so how to define the gating criteria between incident management and problem management and document this in the process. So the gating criteria, so when does an incident become a problem? Hopefully that's not what we're asking here. So incidents never become problems. Incidents always stay their own entity, but incidents and incident symptoms can actually give us sort of a heads up that we have something that is problematic, a causal factor of these symptoms being generated in our organization. Okay. I'm not sure if that's what you actually meant with your question. If not, if I didn't answer that well, then I'm so sorry. Perhaps you can try again. All right, so I do have a question about proactive problem management, and thank you for that, Craig. A decent problem management process historically focused on reactive problems. So the process is based on major incidents in their own environment. Earlier this year, they implemented proactive problem management and using tribal knowledge to identify proactive opportunities. Quickly exhausted the list. Wow, fantastic. Sounds like you were handling some technical debt. I love hearing that. That's something that problem management is really, really good at. Do I have any suggested techniques on how to identify proactive problem opportunities? Absolutely. Craig, so taking a look at historical logs from an event management monitoring perspective is actually very helpful there. Informational event logs tell us what normal activity of systems and certain services actually is, and we can understand from a business change perspective, if the business is planning on going in a certain direction, do we actually have the capability or capacity to enable that change in direction, or for that service to actually perform as it's going to be needed in the future? That's sort of a proactive way to take a look at performance elements of our processes and what needs to happen in order to enable us to move forward. In those cases, problem management often works very closely with other processes, such as availability and capacity. If they are critical services and critical systems, we would also involve continuity. Usually, we get that information from business relationship managers and at times from service level managers as well. But problem management, becoming proactive, is very, very tightly coupled with great integration with other strategic and tactical processes. If problem management is only integrated with operational processes, such as incident and change, it will stay reactive in nature most of the time. It's the integration with those strategic and tactical processes that enables us to become much more proactive. All right, I'm going to take a look at a couple of chats now, and then I'm going to move forward, and I'll get to the rest of the questions. Okay, so Craig is saying, oh, Craig, you're using a couple of different things. That's awesome. Craig is saying they've tried looking at event data, but we have terrible alert fatigue. Ah, yes, yes. So one of the things that problem management helps us to do is to identify problems within other processes. So problem management would love to become more proactive, but they're dependent on event, and event is not showing us very useful information. The first time organizations put reactive problem management in place, the same thing happens. They're dependent on incident management, but a cleanup of the incident data is needed before we can actually get good at it. So yeah, we definitely want to see that. Problem management can be one of those processes, and should be one of those processes, that is actively engaged with continual service improvement and is brought in to say, what is the problem? What is it that we're seeing? Why can't we utilize event management? What's going on? Alert fatigue is a sad, sad state of affairs, but I definitely get it, Craig. So yeah, CSI, or continual service improvement, often works very, very closely with problem management in order to help us understand the true nature of the improvements, enhancements, or problems that we're experiencing in all areas. They're experts at root cause analysis and permanent fix. Why wouldn't we use them? Yeah. Once again, I'm going to get to those QA questions in just a moment. I'd like to just advance a couple of slides before I get in trouble over here. People are really nice to me. They give me water, they give me different means of doing my audio, but you know, if I don't advance, then I get the whip. All right, so once again, this is our happy path. Always start with our happy path, our high-level activities first, detail comes later. The other reason that you want to do the high level first is because some of the questions that you come up with will indicate who you need in the room with you or in the online environment with you to actually get better at this. It is at the procedural level that you should try and value stream any process, but especially problem management. Really, value streaming helps to determine where do you have over bureaucracy, do you have any waste, can you actually make this process much more efficient and easy to use. The right people collaborating on a procedural level is incredibly important, and that's going to be a question for each of these high-level activity areas. And remember those loops. You are going to be doing some of these activities on a regular basis. Classification is going to be done and redone. Different workarounds are going to be considered along the life cycle of problems and known errors. And what if you got your solution wrong? What if it didn't work? How far back do you route everyone back? Do you immediately jump into additional root cause analysis, or do you want to go back to the beginning and make sure that you had it right in your definition and defining of a problem altogether? As you go through each of your high-level areas, you are going to come across definitions that you need to get right. Classification is a term that is given to encompass two things: categorization of problems as well as prioritization of problems. Defining your categories and defining the way that you prioritize problems is very important for you to be able to get classification right. We often run across, or I should say, I often run across organizations that say, just use the same stuff that incident uses. Well, that works somewhat okay from a categorization perspective, but it doesn't work as well from a prioritization perspective. Problem management has to consider risk. The risk of the workaround being in place for a length of time, the risk of recurrence of a problem, the ease of use or ease of execution of the workaround. Generally, we talk about prioritization and problem management is about impact to the organization and the probability of a recurrence of the symptoms caused by the problem itself, also known as recurrence of incidents. Root cause analysis, this is a specific approach. I recommend, as I said earlier, 3 different approaches being actually worked on in your organization, or worked with, I should say. And a workaround. Yeah, a workaround is really intended, in the beginning at least, to be a temporary approach or a way to bypass or reduce the symptoms or the pain that we're feeling. This is about mitigation or service restoration. Workarounds are put in place in problem management in order to assist incident management. So they must be understood by incident management. It's a certain type of terminology and language. Once we get to the procedural level, the detail underneath each of these high-level activities, you can start to value stream. You can bring incident management and specifically service desk staff in and say, does this workaround language make sense? Where should it be? How do we get this to you? Also, where along the life cycle of a problem and known error can you actually place a problem in a monitoring state to gather additional information? Can it be at any time? What happens to the clock? What happens to communications? How is this actually going to work? The other thing we have to focus on with the front half of problem management has to do with additional detail around identification. In some instances, most in fact, we have to recognize that problems can be demanded by our customers. We often have customers knocking on IT's door saying, I demand that you look at the root cause of this incident and make sure that it never happens again. Defining problem identification, what we do in these situations, is a discussion at the high level whiteboard moment. The second half of our problem management process is really around known errors. So once again, defining what a known error is. In my definition here at the bottom of the slide, I've said we have a root cause of a problem and we understand causal factors. That's how I'm defining a known error. Solutions are determined. We submit a request for change. Everything is good. The sun is shining. We can close. The distinction and difference between something that is resolved and something that is closed must be defined within the problem management process. Once again, when can we put something in a monitoring state? I always say at any time in problem management, we can determine that monitoring would bring us more value. Solution determination, really, I want to see what options do I have. I always have a little bit of a red flag when my problem management teams are telling me there's only one solution. There's usually a lot of options. There's usually certain workarounds that work better than others, and I'd like to see more digging in those areas. Everyone often takes for granted that problem management will be submitting requests for change, but I want to make sure that change management's definition of a change is recognizable by problem management and the actions and activities that it's trying to execute. Once again, when we are talking about closure, how long do we need to wait before we can formally close an existing problem and known error? And the last piece on this slide is really about incident matching. Incident matching enables the integration between incident and problem management, often through the definition of symptoms that are being felt at the incident level and the causal factors within problem. And we need to make sure that incident management can match existing incidents to active problems and known errors in order to secure workaround information to restore service as quickly as possible. Now, unfortunately, I only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to have to show you these next slides before I get whipped, and then I will start to go through the Q&A. So sorry about that, folks. Roles and responsibilities. We have to have a problem owner. A problem manager is responsible for the day-to-day operation and effectiveness of the problem management actual process itself. The subject matter experts that are acting as point people for actual problem records themselves are called often problem coordinators. They are responsible to make sure that problem and known error records are up to date and effective communication is happening. They often liaise very, very closely, as I've mentioned before, with change coordinators and continual service improvement. One of the most important things here is that every problem and known error has to have someone that is responsible for facilitating it. I often call that role a problem coordinator. It is up to you to utilize your organizational requirements and culture to make sure that they have appropriate names. Continuing on with our 9 pieces of every process, measurements. You must have critical success factors and key performance indicators in place. These critical success factors that are the larger bubbles on the left-hand side are always tied to your process intent. Key performance indicators follow a very specific formula. You want a percentage of something to be increasing or decreasing over a stated period of time. So for example, the first KPI listed, new problem records generated, how that would really look is I want to see a 5% increase in new problem records generated by the database team over a period of 6 months. It can't not have a timeline associated with it, because if it doesn't, then it's never achievable. Problem management is very tightly integrated, both to incident management and change management. A lot of discussion is expected within our course here. Two-way integration, what is coming from and to, between all processes tightly coupled, is important. Those of you trying to become proactive, you're going to work on integrating problem management with event, with continual improvement, and multiple other processes, as I mentioned earlier. Last but not least, our technology considerations, and I am at the top of the hour. Sorry for those of you that have to drop off. When you are having technology considerations, this is always tied to the procedural level, not the high-level happy path. This is procedural. I'm not going to read all of this to you. I'm sure you're good at reading yourself. But don't forget that your tool needs or technology needs are about today plus the future, where service management is going and where each individual process is going as well. Every process in our course is going to have tons of discussion, forced as in this slide, or my preference, as I like to do as we go through each area. And my people here at Pink Elephant have put together a special offer for each of you for the IT Service Management Essentials course. Maybe you can take a bit of a deeper look at this, but there is a promo code where you can receive 10% off the course. I'd love to see you in Vegas. That is where I'm actually slated to deliver that. So if you're not sick of my voice, maybe you can come and see me in person. Hope to see you there, but there's also some virtual classes that are available as well. This is only available till December 30th. Believe it or not, that's 10 more days. I can't believe it's almost end of December. All right. You will receive this slide deck, and after this course, I am actually going to go through all of the Q&A sessions and provide responses, which can also be provided as part of that. So thank you very, very much, everybody. I really appreciate you being with us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of week. Thanks, everyone.